Tonight on Ukraine Today, a strike on Russian semiconductors. Ukraine's defense forces hit a military tech plant in Russia. Target: Kyiv. Russian troops push through the Sumy region, aiming for Poltava and beyond. Motorcycle troops. The occupiers are using dirt bikes, buggies and scooters to break through. No new American aid. Secretary of State Rubio on current support for Ukraine and what comes next. Trump and Putin's phone call. Real consequences. Fresh reactions. All that and more in today's episode of Ukraine Today. Hi there, we're from Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Robchun. Subscribe, hit like button, and let's get started. Ukraine's defense forces hit the Bhov semiconductor plant in Russia's Oryol region. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed the strike. That factory, bypassing sanctions, makes up to 3 million components a year. They supply at least 90 companies in Russia's military-industrial complex. These components go to Sukhoi fighter jets, Iskander missiles and Kinjal hypersonics. So yeah, big target. Russia keeps pushing forward in the east. According to Deep State, their forces have advanced in Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk. But now, something bigger. They might be trying to break through the Sumy region to reach Poltava. Why? Because the ultimate goal is Kyiv. At the same time, elite Russian units are moving toward the Kursk region in Russia. The Ukrainian General Staff says they're preparing for a new large-scale assault. Also, Russia has upgraded its kamikaze drones. Defense Express reports they're now packing dual warheads, both Russian and Iranian, with a total weight of 90 kilos. Before it was 50. The Russian part adds powder to make a bigger fireball. The Iranian part combines cumulative fragmentation and blast effects. All the details in our next report.
Russia is once again blackmailing Ukraine with a large-scale offensive along the entire front line. There are opinions that Poltava and the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, could be under threat.
The resources of the Russian army are being depleted one way or another regardless. And in any case, what we're saying is that the offensive impulses Russia is showing today are clearly not enough to carry out no full-fledged operational, tactical level operations. Obviously, the Russian strategic offensive operation, for its part, is still ongoing.
In addition to threats to use the RS-24 Yars missile with a possible nuclear warhead against Ukraine, Russian forces have begun employing a new tactic to exhaust Ukrainian troops. These are breakthroughs using motorcycles, buggies and scooters. Considering that the Yars missile never actually launched from the test site, while the scooters at least managed to move, the latter idea is more advantageous for Russia.
This so-called summer campaign, or rather yet another summer campaign by the enemy, is indeed entering its active phase B, and it is clear that the priorities are attempts to fully occupy the Donetsk and Luhansk regions and their populations.
After analyzing the situation, the Institute for the Study of War concluded that Russia does not agree to a ceasefire before peace negotiations in order to advance on the battlefield and secure concessions from Ukraine and its partners.
We can see how difficult the situation has become for us right now in the Pokrovsk direction, because the enemy is managing to cut off logistics on the Kostiantynivka-Pokrovsk highway. In fact, it is clear that the battle for Kostiantynivka, which we have been talking about, has indeed already begun.
No matter how much Russia advances, the Ukrainian armed forces are confidently eliminating the occupiers from our land. Minus 1,030 Russian invaders in the past 24 hours. In total, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Russia has lost more than 975,000 soldiers killed and wounded in its war against Ukraine.
The enemy's attempts have not gone unnoticed and are being assessed by our command. Accordingly, in defense, we deploy our forces and resources to prevent any breakthrough and collapse of the front. This is our main task today, as well as the opportunity to exhaust the enemy's resources as much as possible.
The Ukrainian armed forces are also achieving tactical successes in the Kursk region, which the Russian side claims to have supposedly liberated. Recently, Ukrainian soldiers advanced to the southern outskirts of the settlement of Tetkino in the Kursk region. However, the Russians also achieved certain successes there. Specifically, there were recorded advances by the occupiers toward the international border checkpoint southeast of Tetkino.
The main thing is that part of this border area remains under the control of the defense forces. The defense forces continue to carry out their assigned tasks. The Kursk operation is not over. I would also add here that in this context, I consider the Belgorod situation together with it.
The occupiers have reduced infantry assaults but increased the number and scale of air and artillery strikes in the Kupiansk district. However, in the Borova area, Ukrainian forces have recently achieved successes. It has been confirmed that our defenders have advanced west of Sergeyevka.
But the Kupiansk direction is one of the main priorities for the Russians in this offensive campaign, in this wave, this next summer offensive wave. Accordingly, as I have already said, the enemy will continue to try to advance toward Borova and Kupiansk.
According to reports from the General Staff, the aggressor is now being forced to transfer reserves from other directions to the Kursk region, in particular airborne troops and naval infantry, which were supposed to reinforce offensive actions in the Toretsk, Pokrovsk and Oryol directions. Despite the fact that the Russian army is also continuing combat operations toward 4 key industrial cities in the Donetsk region. These are Kostiantynivka, Drushkivka, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And now, AI drones. Defense Express warns that Russia is launching drones with artificial intelligence. No GPS, no operators. They use computer vision and algorithms to find and strike targets, military and civilian. And here's another tactic: motorcycle troops. The Russians are sending in small, fast units on bikes, buggies and scooters. Yes, they are losing people, but it works. These raids bypass standard Ukrainian defenses and exhaust our frontline troops. Here's the story.
Motorized assaults are becoming the main tactic of the Russian army. With these suicide squads, the Russians are trying to wear down the Ukrainian armed forces.
It allows you to maneuver quickly and stay alive and well, because no matter now the enemy is using a lot of means of destruction, including aerial ones.
These rapid breakthroughs are exactly what is becoming the tactic of the Russian army today. To break through, secure a foothold, and then bring in the necessary reserves. But on the other hand, good weather is needed for this. You also need a suitable landscape location, because it's clear that such attacks can really only be carried out over flat steppe terrain.
We're talking not just about dozens, but hundreds of such assault troops.
We recently had an assault, 100 motorcycles. 100 motorcycles. A whole company. There needs to be an advantage in drones. A mortar won't help, artillery won't help. Infantry, small arms will help, and an advantage in drones, so the pilot can catch up to them.
The Russian command has become so inspired by this new opportunity that they are already trying to officially organize frontline operations using motorcycles.
This tactic of motorcycle attacks was introduced by General Modvichev, who operated in the Pokrovsk direction, whom we remember as the Butcher General, the one who stormed Mariupol, destroyed Avdiivka and other settlements, and who has now already been appointed commander of the ground forces.
War is a struggle of technologies. There is constant development. Our Russian soldier is unpretentious.
They also want to create training centers for motorcyclists and integrate them into regular military units. And according to experts, motorcycles will be easier to obtain than other equipment.
Obviously, there will be supplies from China, which is also involved in this area. And it's hard to say that an ordinary motorcycle is for military purposes. There is always a caveat here, that this is not military equipment. So what complaints could there be? For China, it's obvious that this will still be profitable.
The only remaining question is about the people. Because, as usual, people for this so-called brave cause are neither counted nor naturally spared.
Most of these motorcyclists are killed or destroyed or wounded. In other words, they are not able to break through on a large scale the way they would like to. It is probably difficult to find, even in the entire Russian Federation, such a corresponding number of motorbikers who are ready to get on a motorcycle, ride a certain distance, and get into the package.
I was just in shock when I saw a motorcycle explode and the person falls, screams it, and their leg is torn off or something. Well, my eyes, I had orders to just keep going. I couldn't stop or do anything, because if I stopped, they'd blow me up too.
I wonder how many hundreds of thousands or even millions of his own soldiers Putin is willing to sacrifice, just so he doesn't have to admit that he lost the war a long time ago.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about this war. Click the link in the description and become our sponsor. Together to victory. And if you haven't liked this video yet, now's the time. It really helps. Now to the US. Still, no decision on new aid for Ukraine. But US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the existing deliveries continue. He spoke at a Senate hearing, saying Trump's team is sticking to agreements made earlier. And that includes weapons shipments. The Secretary of State also touched on the issue of US sanctions in his speech.
Vladimir Putin woke up this morning, he had the same set of sanctions on him that he's always had since the beginning of this conflict, and Ukraine was still getting armaments and shipments from us and from our allies, and the European Union is about to impose additional sanctions, and the US is looking for no Patriot batteries to be able to transfer from other NATO nations into Ukrainian hands.
Rubio admitted Putin woke up this morning under the same sanctions he's had since the war began, and yet the war continues. So, let's be honest. Current sanctions didn't stop Putin. Conclusion? We need more, and not just sanctions. Thankfully, Europe gets it. The EU has just approved the 17th package of sanctions against Russia. This one targets about 200 ships in Russia's so-called shadow fleet. Meanwhile, President Zelensky has already discussed the preparation of the 18th package of sanctions with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
This is a step in the right direction, and there should be as many sanctions as needed until Russia gets interested in peace and feels the full price of its aggression, and this war it wants to drag on. It's Moscow that's stalling peace. That's why Russian oil, their tanker fleet, the whole energy sector that funds the war, all the banks, every financial scheme, and Russia's military industry, all of it must be targets for sanctions.
Minister of Defense of Germany, Boris Pistorius, says the US President Trump misjudged his influence over Putin, Reuters reports. According to Pistorius, Trump's recent phone call with the Kremlin didn't lead to any peace breakthrough. The minister says the conversation just confirmed what most of us already knew.
I believe it's fair to say, yesterday's talks confirmed it once again. Russia issues statements, but there's still no proof of any real intentions. No concessions, just talk of a ceasefire on their own terms. And those terms are well known. No NATO membership for Ukraine, giving up territory, and more. It seems Vladimir Putin is simply playing for time. Even if Russia is willing to talk about a memorandum, there's no ceasefire in sight. That's my assessment. There's no clear timeline. Sadly, it must be said, Putin still doesn't seem truly interested in peace. At least not under conditions acceptable to others. That's why I stick to my line. I no longer judge words, only actions. I believe that helps all of us better understand whether his intentions are serious.
Let me remind you, Trump and other White House officials have repeatedly said they might walk away from the negotiation process if they don't see real progress. The Kremlin knows this and plays alone. They talk about being ready to peace, while in reality they keep the war going with zero consequences. According to Czech President Petr Pavel, if the US pulls out of the talks, it would be a gift to the Kremlin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also emphasized the importance of the USA's involvement.
It's important for America to stay part of the process that brings peace closer, because it's America that Russia is afraid of, and it's American influence that can actually save many lives if it puts pressure on Putin to stop this war.
That's all for today. Thank you for being with us. We read your comments and feel your support. Strength to our defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Subscribe, leave a like, and see you next time.